Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen. Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice, and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. We're continuing in the book, The Straight Path, As-Sirat al-Mustaqim, by the Allama Abdullah al-Harari, rahimahullah ta'ala. We're in the section discussing or confirming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not exist in a place. Or to put it perhaps more succinctly, Allah exists without a place. So in this section we mentioned a few dalils out of many that Allah exists without a place. We mentioned the ayah, Laysa kamithlihi shay, which can only be understood as meaning that Allah has no similarity of any kind to the creation. So the fact that the creations are in places means Allah for sure is not. We also mentioned the Sahih Hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari and others, كان الله ولم يكن شيء غيره, which means Allah existed in eternity and there was not a thing existing other than He. This hadith also definitively says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists without a place, because it says Allah existed and there was no other thing existing. That means places did not exist, spaces did not exist, time did not exist, yet Allah did exist. So Allah exists without these things. We also mentioned the hadith, Allahumma anta al-zahiru falaysa fawqaka shay wa anta al-batinu falaysa dunaka shay. The hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Oh Allah, you are al-zahir, so there's nothing above you, and you are al-batin, so there's nothing below you." Okay, and some of the scholars said this hadith also is a dalil that Allah is not in a place. And then after confirming that Allah exists without being in a place, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, started mentioning some of the shubhas that the people of Tashbih bring. The people who liken Allah to the creation, they sometimes mention certain things to try to support their false creed. And the author, may Allah have mercy on him, started addressing some of those. Among the things they say is they say that we point our hands to the sky when we make dua, and that's some kind, to them, they consider that some kind of sign. And we said this does not support their creed, and we gave reasons why. Another thing that they sometimes mention is the night of Isra and al-Mi'raj. They claim that this means Allah is in a place in the sky. And we say this does not mean that, and that this does not support their creed. And they cite the ayahs in Surah An-Najm, ثُمَّ دَنَا فَتَدَلَّى فَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى. They try to use those to say that Allah moves from place to place. And we demonstrated, based on the hadith and the ayah that came later, that these ayahs are actually about Jibreel alayhi salam, not about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we mentioned the hadith of the slave girl, And we spent some time explaining why that hadith does not support the creed that Allah is in a place. Then we addressed the thing that they sometimes say, where they claim that saying Allah is above the throne is not likening him to the creation because there's no creation above the throne. So they say it's not likening him to the creation. And we addressed that because it's confirmed in the hadith that there is at least one creation above the throne. That is the book in which it's written, Inna rahmati sabaqat ghadabi. Certainly my mercy surpasses my punishment. This book that contains this for sure is above the Arsh. And there may also be other books above the Arsh, because the Hadith mentions some things that are a little bit unclear as to whether they're above the Arsh or below it. But there may be even more than that book above the Arsh. But that book, at the very least, is for sure above the Arsh. So they do not escape the fact that they're likening Allah to the creation by saying Allah is above the throne. They will try to make an excuse to say, oh, that's not likening Allah to the creation, but it still is. This does not save them. MashaAllah. After that, we even used a brief argument that the one who believes Allah is in a place and occupies space, this person could not even defeat a sun worshiper in an argument. MashaAllah. So just so you understand really how weak this aqidah is, the aqidah of those who believe Allah is in a place, it's so weak that a person would lose an argument against a sun worshiper. MashaAllah. After that, we talked about the hadith that mentions the word enda, which is one of the hadith that's about the book, which is above the throne. Some people try to use the word end to claim that this means Allah is above the throne, and we refuted that because the end also carries the meaning of tashrif, that it's saying something either is honored or that it's like a special knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's where we've gotten to. So we've arrived now at page 89. For those of you who don't know what page we're on, we've arrived to page 89 in the book, where it says Al-Bukhari narrated. So near the top of the page of page 89. What the author is going to do now is he's going to move to some other hadith that we could use to refute the likeners. MashaAllah. It says, Al-Bukhari narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إذا كان أحدكم في صلاته فإنه يناجي ربه فلا يبصقن في قبلته ولا عن يمينه فإن ربه بينه وبين قبلته. Which translates literally. If you take it literally, and we don't take this literally, but if you were to take it literally, how do I say this? A person who takes it literally would understand it like this, as if it says, if one of you were in his prayer, then surely he is addressing his Lord. So let him not spit in the direction of the Qibla or to his right, for certainly his Lord is between him and his Qibla. MashaAllah. So the true meaning of this hadith is that it's poor manners when you're in salat to spit in front of you or on your right. Okay, that's the true meaning of it. Why? Because mercies come from the direction of the Qibla. Mercies comes from the direction of the Qibla. Talking about the special mercy that comes to the one who's in salat, it comes from the direction of the front. This is why it's bad manners to spit in that direction. MashaAllah. It says, this hadith is stronger in chain than the hadith of the female slave. MashaAllah. So we talked a bit 2 or 3 classes ago about the hadith of the slave girl. And we mentioned at that time how the chain of the narration that's in Muslim is a sahih chain. But the metin of the hadith, the actual account of what happened, has what's known as mukhalafa in it. It contradicts other narrations. And one of the conditions for a hadith to be sahih is that it has to be free from mukhalafa. It can't be contradicting other narrations. And so some scholars, because of the contradiction, consider that hadith weak, and other scholars interpret it so that there is no contradiction, and they were able to declare it sahih on the condition of that interpretation. Well, this hadith that we're talking about now, about not spitting in the direction of the Qibla, has a stronger chain than the hadith of the slave girl. So if one of these likeners were truly being sincere, they would base their belief, of course they're not being sincere, but I'm just saying, if their methodology were to take the strongest evidence, then instead of believing Allah is in the direction of up, which is what they believe, they would take this hadith and believe that Allah is on the earth between the one who's making salat and the Kaaba, because this hadith is stronger than that one. But no, what do they do for this hadith? They make ta'wil. They interpret it in a different way, which of course they say to us that making ta'wil is haram. They say it's ta'til. They say it's atheism to make ta'wil, to interpret an ayah of Quran or a hadith in a way that's not literal. They say that's atheism. They say you're rejecting the attributes. Yet they do the same thing. MashaAllah. When it comes to this hadith, they don't accept it literally. They don't believe Allah is on the earth between the one who's praying and the Qibla. They don't believe that. So why did they interpret this one differently, but interpret the slave girl hadith literally? Why didn't they interpret that one the way the scholars of Islam, who said that it's sahih, interpreted it? Why didn't they interpret the hadith of the slave girl as meaning that Allah has high status, and then interpret this one literally? What dalil do they have for saying that's the one that needs to be interpreted literally instead of this one? They don't have a dalil. What else? What's next? Bottom of page 89. It says, Al-Bukhari also narrated. So this is another hadith from Al-Bukhari. Also narrated from the route of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, radiallahu anhu, that the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, said, Irba'u ala anfusikum, فإنكم لا تدعون أصم ولا غائبا إنكم تدعون سميعا قريبا والذي تدعونه أقرب إلى أحدكم من عنق راحلة أحدكم. If you were to take this hadith literally, it would mean, take it easy on yourselves, for indeed you are not calling on someone who is deaf or absent. You are calling on someone who hears, and he is close. And the one whom you are calling is closer to one of you than the neck of the animal that you are riding. MashaAllah. So this hadith requires a little bit of background. So in this hadith, the Sahaba, MashaAllah, were traveling with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when they made it to the valley of Khaybar, they started making dua and dhikr in a loud voice. And when they did that, our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is when he said, take it easy on yourselves. Okay, what that means is don't raise your voices. You don't have to be so loud. Okay. He says, for indeed you are not calling on someone who is deaf or absent. Okay, what that means is the one that you're making dua to, the one that you're doing dhikr of, he hears what you're saying. And it doesn't matter if you're using a loud voice or if you're using a soft voice or if you're using a very, very, very soft voice. Okay? He hears everything. Okay? No matter how loud or how soft that thing is, he hears it. He says, nor is the one you're calling on absent. Okay, what does that mean? When the Prophet ﷺ said Allah is not absent, what that means is that nothing is hidden from Allah. Okay, wherever you are, Allah knows your situation. Okay, it means Allah knows His slave better than the slave knows himself. Okay, He knows all of your circumstances. He knows, whatever your current status is. Nothing is hidden from Him, mashallah. This is what it means. The hadith continues, says, you are calling on someone who hears, and if taken literally, it would mean, and He is close. Of course, we don't mean that Allah is close in a spatial sense or a physical sense, because Allah is not in a place. It says, and the one whom you are calling is closer to one of you than the neck of the animal you are riding. What do these things mean? Again, the basic meaning is that Allah knows the slave better than the slave knows himself. This hadith, before we go into this issue with the likeners, this hadith has several benefits. Number one, we learn from this hadith that actually the Sahaba did used to make dhikr and dua in groups. Okay, they used to gather for that, because here that's the exact situation that this took place in. So when you hear some people try to claim that it's a bid'ah to make dhikr in a group, just know that they're not very familiar with the hadith. MashaAllah. The other thing that somebody asked, well, what is Allah if He's not a man or person? Now, I'm going to try not to be harsh on this, but we are Muslims. We worship the Creator. We do not worship creations. If Allah were a man, then He would not be worthy of worship. If Allah were a man, He would be like us. We don't worship human beings. We don't worship men. We don't worship people. Allah is the creator of men, the creator of people, the creator of planets, the creator of the universe. And He is not like anything in the universe. He's not like any of His creation. And how could He possibly be similar to His creation when He is the creator and He is eternal and He is unchanging and He is not bound by space and time? Yet the creations all have beginnings. They're all subject to change. They're all bound by space and time. Okay, the creations are just like a completely different thing. The creations are in a completely different category than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no similarity of any kind. And Allah Himself says this in the Quran. He says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, which means there is not a thing with any similarity of any kind to Allah. Okay. So now I see that you want to argue. Why do we call Him He? Because this is a weakness of language. It does not mean that Allah is male. It does not mean that Allah is masculine. It does not mean that Allah has any similarity to human beings. And I will say straight up, anybody who believes Allah is a male or a man, this person is an idol worshiper. I can't put it any plainer than that. The one who worships the creation is a worshiper of idols. If anyone believes Allah is a man or similar to a man, then he's no better than someone who's worshiping a statue. That person is no better than, I'll just leave it at that. MashaAllah. MashaAllah. But another thing that we can benefit from this hadith is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described Allah using the word Kharib, which, if taken literally, would mean close or near. And these likeners, what they do is they take things very literally. But here's the thing, though. If they believe that Allah is above the throne, then Allah could not be called Kharib in the literal sense. Kharib meaning close or near. The Arsh is super far away. I mean, I can't even explain in words how far away the Arsh is. You all know that everything we see when we look up, all those stars and planets and galaxies, all of that stuff is between the earth and the first sky. So how far is it just to get to the first sky? Very far. And then between the first sky, there's another distance to the second sky, and another distance to the third sky, and another distance to the fourth sky, and another distance to the fifth sky, and another distance to the sixth sky, and another distance to the seventh sky. And then above the seventh sky is paradise, which is also huge. And so way above the paradise, and Allahu Alam, how many levels there are to the paradise? Way above the paradise, you finally get the Arsh. So if they claim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above the Arsh, then they are simultaneously claiming that He is not close to the slaves, or certainly not in any kind of physical sense. So what do they say about this hadith? Do they take this hadith literally? And do they believe that Allah is literally closer to the person than the neck of the animal He's riding? No, they say Allah is way, 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 way up. They don't take this hadith literally. So they didn't take the hadith about Allah being between the prayer and the Qibla literally. And they didn't take the hadith about Allah being closer to the person than the neck of the animal He's riding literally. So why do they say it's okay to take those hadith in a non-literal way? Why do they say it's okay to make ta'wil of those hadith, but then they refuse to make ta'wil of the hadith of the slave girl? Why is that? What dalil do they have? What evidence do they have that the hadith of the slave girl should be taken literally, and these two should be taken by ta'wil with an interpretation, a non-literal interpretation? Why do they say that? What dalil do they have? They don't have a dalil. Let's continue. It says, so it is said to the opponent, talk about, this is what you say to one of these likeners. If you took the hadith of the female slave by its apparent meaning, when he says apparent meaning here, what they mean is the literal meaning. Okay, the literal meaning, sometimes it's translated into English as apparent meaning. You say to them, if you took the hadith of the female slave by its apparent meaning, and these two hadiths by their apparent meanings, then your claim that Allah is in the sky is invalidated. Because you have two hadith saying, if you take it literally, that Allah is on the earth. And then one hadith, if you take it literally, saying that Allah is in the sky. Then, of course, what they actually teach isn't any of those three. They teach Allah is above the sky, not in the sky. So, but at any point, these three hadith contradict one another. They contradict one another. Continuing in the book, it says, conversely, if you give alternative explanation, that means ta'wil. The one who translated this text, he translates the word ta'wil as alternative explanation. Says, if you give alternative explanation to these two hadith, meaning the one about the Qibla and the one about the neck of the animal, it says, if you give alternative explanation, a ta'wil, to these two hadiths, and you do not give alternative explanation to the hadith of the slave girl, then this is arbitrariness, a saying without evidence. Do you see what the author is trying to say here? He's trying to say you have three hadith that contradict. And in order to resolve the contradiction, these likeners, they make ta'wil of two of them, and they take one of them literally. Which one is the one that should be taken literally? Why did they take the hadith of the slave girl literally and make ta'wil of the other two? Why not take the one about the Qibla literally and make ta'wil of the one about the hadith of the slave girl and the one about the animal's neck? Or why do they not take the hadith about the neck of the animal literally and take the one about the Qibla and the hadith of the slave girl in a non-literal way? What dalil do they have for which one is the one that should be literal? They have no dalil. They have no dalil, no evidence to support why they took that one literally and why they chose to interpret the other ones in a non-literal way. The author here, he calls it arbitrariness. They're just being arbitrary. They picked one because they're following their desires. They're not following what Allah and His Messenger said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No, they're just doing what they want, what they like, what appeals to their nafs. It says here, the author says, and Allah's saying about the Jews would be applicable to you. This is what we say to the likener. Because you're doing this without any evidence, this very biting, very harsh criticism that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made of the Jews would apply to you also, meaning to you, to the likener. What's this criticism? It says in Surah AlBaqarah, أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ, which means, do you believe in some of the book and disbelieve in some of it? You understand what it's saying here? They're picking and choosing. They're picking and choosing. This is what Jews do. They pick and choose what to believe in and what not to believe in. This is what Christians do. They pick and choose from their book what they want to believe, what they don't want to believe. And these likeners do the same thing. According to them, it's a hard and fast rule. You can't ever take anything in a non-literal way. You must always take everything literally. And so when they hear the hadith of the slave girl, they take it literally. And then when they hear these other hadith, they take it in a non-literal way. They interpret it. So it's just like, at times they're believing their own talk, and at other times they're rejecting their own talk. They're picking and choosing when to apply this rule and when not to apply this rule. You understand? They're being very inconsistent. This is a sign of insincerity. This is a sign of insincerity. It's a sign that someone's following their own nafs instead of earnestly seeking to understand what Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught. It says, likewise, what do you say about His saying, exalted is He, فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. This ayah also is in Surah AlBaqarah. If you take it literally, it would mean, wherever you turn yourself, then there is the wajh of Allah. Now, wajh, many people understand this word in the literal sense, which would mean a face, like a body part, face. But we know that if it were true that Allah had a face, had a body part, then it would be true that Allah has billions of partners, because so many of the creations have faces. Right now, there's 7 billion or so human beings on the earth, all of which have faces. But there's also billions of animals that have faces. You think humans are the only things with faces? Monkeys have faces, apes have faces, pigs and dogs and cats, even ants have faces. Okay? There are many, very many creations that have faces. So if it were true that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a face, then it would be true that He has billions of partners. Yet the very clear teaching of Islam is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no partner. Not in His self, not in His attributes, and not in his doings. So what do these likeners, these people who believe Allah is in a place above the throne, what do they say about this ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah? Which means wherever you turn, it means no matter which direction you look in, there is the wajh of Allah. So they understand wajh to mean face. They understand wajh to mean face, to mean a body part. So how do they understand this ayah then that says no matter what direction you look at, you're looking at the wajh of Allah? To them, it doesn't matter if you face the east or the west or the south or the north. If you look up, if you look down, if you take this ayah literally, it means that if you take it literally, it would mean that Allah has a face, and that face is in all of those directions. So wouldn't this therefore contradict their teaching that Allah is in the direction of up exclusively? They teach Allah is in the direction of up, and they teach Allah is not in any direction besides up. So what do they do with this ayah that says no matter what direction you look at? Let's see what the author says. The author says, if you, we're still talking to the likener here with this you, if you give it an alternative explanation, meaning if you make ta'wil, if you do not interpret it in the literal way, why do you not give the hadith of the female slave an alternative explanation? So again, what the author's doing here is he's pointing out that these people aren't even following their own rules. They're contradicting themselves. These people are just following their own desires. What does this ayah really mean? This ayah, فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ, what does it really mean? It says it came in the tafsir of this verse from Mujahid. Mujahid is one of the famous scholars among the tabi'een. He was a student of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. It came in the tafsir of this verse from Mujahid, the student of Ibn Abbas, the Qibla of Allah. So Mujahid, the student of Ibn Abbas, by the way, is known as Tarjuman al-Quran. Like the explainer of the Quran is Ibn Abbas. And Mujahid is one of his most famous students. Mujahid explained this ayah by saying that the word wajh here means qibla. Means what? Qibla. Okay, so Mujahid is saying this ayah that says no matter which way you turn, that's the wajh of Allah. He says the understanding of it, the proper understanding of it, is that no matter which way you turn, that's the qibla for your salat. Okay, but this is not to be applied in every situation. Okay, those of you who have studied fiqh know that there are two situations where you're permitted to make your salat in a direction besides the Kaaba, the direction of the Kaaba. One of those situations is the situation of extreme fear. Like if salat time comes in while you're in the heat of battle, you've got your sword in your hand, you're already in the midst of the army, of the enemy army, you're fighting, you're swinging your sword, you're holding your shield, you're in the midst of the battle, and salat time comes in. What do? Well, you still have to make salat. You have to make salat before that prayer time goes out, because there's never an excuse to skip a salat. As long as your mind is still present, the salat is an obligation upon you. So please don't be one of these people who skips a salat while they're at work and just says, oh, I'll pray it when I get home. Or don't be one of these people who has a tummy ache, or maybe he's feeling nauseous or something, and he says, oh, I'm sick, I'm not going to pray. No, you always have to pray before the time is out. Even if you're in the midst of a battle, you still have to pray before the time is out. Okay, but in that situation, you don't have to face the Qibla. Okay, in that situation, I mean, there's other things that you can do when you're in the heat of battle, but among the accommodations that are made in that situation is that you don't have to face the Kaaba. So whichever direction you're facing will count as a Qibla for you because you're in the heat of battle. The other situation where you don't need to face the Kaaba in Salat is if the Salat you're praying is an optional prayer, meaning it's not one of the obligatory ones. It's a Sunnah Salat, and you're praying it while you're riding an animal. So you're on the back of a horse or something, traveling. So how many conditions did I mention so far? 3. I said you're traveling, and you're riding an animal, and the salat you're praying is not obligatory. Okay, if all of those conditions are met, well, then what you can do is you can turn your animal towards the Kaaba, and you can make your takbir to enter into the salat, and then after that, you can pray. And if the animal turns and walks some other direction and is no longer facing the Kaaba, you can just continue your salat, because whichever way you turn, that way is the Qibla for that particular salat. And this is what Mujahid, the well-known scholar among the Tabi'een, is saying here. He's saying this ayah is an ayah uh, in reference to the one who is traveling, making an optional salat while on the back of an animal. So I'm going back to the book. It says, thus, he explained the term wajh of Allah as qibla. This means that this verse is revealed in reference to the optional prayer while traveling on an animal. So if you notice, the scholars of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they have ta'wils for all of these. And of course, there must be ta'wils for them, because if you take them all literally, they would contradict. And Islam does not contradict. It says in Surah An-Nisa, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Says, do they not consider the meaning of the Quran? Said, if it had been from other than Allah, they would have found many contradictions in it. But it is from Allah. This means there are no contradictions in it. And if you take all of these things literally, they contradict. If you take ayahs, all the ayahs of Quran literally, they would contradict. If you bring in the hadith, they would contradict also. The only way to make sense of it is to take at least some of these things in a non-literal way. And this is what the likeners sneakily try to do. They pick a few of them and take them literally, and then they interpret all the others in a non-literal way. But they have no dalil, they have no evidence for why, for evidence to say that the ones they took literally should be taken literally. They have no evidence for it. Whereas the proper understanding, the way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is to interpret all of those hadith and all of those ayahs that, if taken literally, uh, it would suggest that Allah has a similarity to the creation. The way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is to take all of them in a non-literal way. That way, they'll all be consistent with the ayah, "Laysa kamithlihi shay," which means there is not a thing with any similarity of any kind to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Going back to the book, page 91, it says, as for the hadith that was narrated by At-Tirmidhi, which is, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman, irhamu man fil ard, yarhamkum man fis sama. So now the author, may Allah have mercy on him, he's turning to yet another hadith that these likeners sometimes bring up to try to support their deviant belief. This is the hadith narrated by At-Tirmidhi, which means those who are merciful, Ar-Rahman is merciful to them. Be merciful to whoever is on earth, and whoever is in the sky will be merciful to you. These likeners, these followers, in our time, the likeners are the followers of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. These guys, what do they say? They take this hadith and they say this means that Allah is in the sky. They take it literally. Literally, it would mean be merciful to whoever is on earth, and the one in the sky will be merciful to you. This is how they choose to take it. Um, and to them, this is some kind of proof that Allah is above the throne. Even though, if you take it literally, it doesn't say above the throne. It says in the sky, which would mean below the throne. But, they're not too consistent anyway. But this is how they want to interpret it. They want you to think that this hadith means Allah is in the sky. But remember, just like we said with the hadith of the slave girl, the best way to interpret a hadith is to look at other things that were passed down from the Prophet, other narrations of that same hadith, or look at ayahs and things like that. In this case, this hadith has other narrations. And among the other narrations is the narration of Zainuddin al-Iraqi, the Hafiz. May Allah have mercy on him. His narration is like this: Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhumur rahim. Irhamu ahl al-ard yarhamukum ahlus sama. It says here, and in another narration, Yarhamkum ahlus sama, which means the occupants of the sky will be merciful to you. Okay, so this takes a little bit of explanation here. The word men in Arabic, mim noon, men, mim with a fatha on it, and then a noon, men, M-A-N, men. This word men in Arabic, it means who. It means who. And just like in English, this word who can sometimes refer to a single thing and can sometimes refer to more than one thing. For example, I could say, hey man, I ran into that guy who used to teach math at the school building. Talking about one person, the guy who. But I could also say, man, I ran into a whole bunch of people who used to teach at that school building. I'm saying who in both cases. When I was talking about one person, I said who. When I was talking about a bunch of people, I still said who. Right? So the word who, you don't know if it's referring to one or if it's referring to more than one. And this a similar thing exists in Arabic, where the word men, which means who, it is used to refer to one. It's also used to refer to more than one. So the first narration of this hadith, the one narrated by Imam at-Tirmidhi, the one that says, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhumur rahman, irhamu men fil ard, yarhamkum men fis sama. They interpret the first man as being about a group. They say that this hadith means, be merciful to men fil ard, to whoever is in the earth. Be merciful to those on the earth. They interpret that one to be plural. And then the second part, Yarhamkum men fis sama, the likeners interpret the end of it to mean, if you're merciful to those on the earth, then the one in the sky will be merciful to you. They say this one is Allah, and it says that the one is in the sky, so this means Allah is in the sky. And then they say, but in the sky really means above the sky. So they say this means Allah is above the sky. This is what they say. But the truth of the matter is, according to the Arabic language, this word men, it's conceivable that it's referring to one thing. It's also conceivable that it's referring to many things. So it's ambiguous. This hadith could mean, be merciful to those on the earth, and those in the sky will be merciful to you. It could be referring to more than one, right? It's possible. So in order for us to figure out which of these two possibilities is the correct understanding, what do you need to do? You need to find evidence. And the best evidence for explaining a hadith, the best source for tafsir of a hadith is to find the other narrations of that very same hadith. And one of the other narrations, narrated by Zainuddin al-Iraqi, rahimahullah, is the one that says, Irhamu ahl al-ard, yarhamukum ahlus sama. This narration of the hadith uses the word ahl instead of the word men. Ahl, A-H-L, ahl. Ahl in Arabic, it means people or like occupants. There's probably, depending on context, a few different ways you could translate it into English. But the important thing is that this word ahl can only refer to a group. The word ahl cannot refer to a single one thing. So this narration of the hadith that says, be merciful to the ahl on earth, meaning to the people of earth, yarhamukum ahlus sama, meaning the people of the sky will be merciful to you, or the inhabitants of the sky, or the occupants of the sky, however you want to translate it. This narration is very clearly saying that it's many of them, which means it could not possibly be referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This narration is clearly saying it's the angels that will be merciful to you. The occupants of the sky are the angels. So when you compare the two narrations, you have one narration that very clearly says it's referring to angels, and you have another narration that's ambiguous. Okay, it might be referring to one thing, or it might be referring to the many angels. Well, what do we say as Ahl Sunnah? We say that both of these narrations are referring to the angels. Why? Because that's the only interpretation that's consistent between the two narrations. So our dalil, that the first narration refers to angels, is the second narration, if that makes sense. So this hadith, it means, be merciful to the people on earth, and the people in the sky will be merciful to you. Or to put it more clearly, be merciful to humans, and angels will be merciful to you. This is how we should understand this hadith. It says, this narration explains the first narration, because the best by which the narrated hadith is explained is another narrated hadith. Just as Hafiz al-Iraqi said in his Millennial Poem, when it says Millennial Poem, it's talking about a poem that reached 1,000 lines of poetry. Several of the important works of Islamic scholarship were rendered into such poems so that it'd be easier to memorize. And in this poem, he says the sentence, وَخَيْرُ مَا فَسَرْتَهُ بِالْوَارِدِ, which means the best thing by which you have explained a hadith is another narrated hadith. Okay, so this is how Ahl Sunnah goes about understanding the meanings of things. We compare one thing that comes in the hadith with the other things that came in the hadith, and we try to make sense of all of it, because we are not the people who pick and choose. We're on page 92. Page 92. Wa alaikum assalam. We are not among the people who pick and choose what to believe. We don't accept some of the Quran and reject some of it. We don't accept some of what the Prophet said and reject some of it. No. We accept everything that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. We accept all of it and we reject none of it. Or at least nothing that's confirmed to him. MashaAllah. This is how the people of truth work to understand the religion. This is how the people of sincerity work to arrive at a proper understanding of what the teachings are. MashaAllah. And, just to be even more clear, these understandings that Ahl Sunnah have, talking about the Ash'aris and the Maturidis when I say Ahl Sunnah, the understanding of the Ash'aris and the Maturidis is the very same understanding that's been passed down from the time of the Sahaba until now. It says, I'm going back to page 92. It says, furthermore, what is meant by the occupants of the sky is the angels. That was mentioned by Hafiz al-Iraqi in his dictation sessions after this hadith. His exact statement is, it is proven by the Prophet's saying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the occupants of the sky, that what is meant by the saying of Allah in the verse, أَأَمِنْتُم مَّن فِي السَّمَاءِ, is the angels. So now we're really getting somewhere. So another thing that the likeners sometimes point to try to support their belief is they point to this ayah in Surah Al-Mulk. It says, "Amintum man fis sama," which means, do you feel secure from who is in the sky? This ayah also says the word men. And we already talked about how the word men, it might refer to one or it might refer to more than one. The likeners, because they already have it in their head that Allah is in the sky, they assume that men here refers to one thing. And they assume that that one thing is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the proper understanding is that in this ayah also, the word men refers to the angels. It says men fis sama would mean the occupants of the sky, the angels. And the dalil that this ayah also, the word men means angels, is the very same hadith we just mentioned. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Be merciful to those on the earth, and those," meaning men fis sama, those in the sky will be merciful to you. This narration is the evidence that the proper tafsir of the first narration and the proper tafsir of this ayah is that men in these places, when it says men fis sama, it's talking about the angels. It's not talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is because Allah is not referred to as the occupants of the sky. The word men, who, is suitable for the singular and the plural, so there is no evidence for them in the verse. The same is said about the verse that comes after it, which is Am amintum man fis samai an yursila alaykum hasiba, which literally means, or do you feel secure from who is in the sky, from sending wind carrying stones upon you? So these two ayahs in Surah Al-Mulk, they come one right after the other. And they both have the phrase men fis sama, which means those in the sky. Those in the sky, it means angels. Okay, when it says those in the sky, it's referring to angels. But the likeners, they take the phrase men fis sama, and they say it refers to Allah. And to them, this is support for their teaching that Allah is above the sky, even though here also, it doesn't say above the sky, it says in the sky. So, they're going to have to do some mental gymnastics to try to figure out how in really means above. But, that's, like I said, they're not known for consistency. Continuing, it says, so men who, in this verse, is also the occupants of the sky, for certainty, for certainly. I think we should scratch out the word for here and just say certainly, just to make it more clear. Allah sends angels to the blasphemers if He willed to punish them in the earthly life, just like in the hereafter. They are the ones appointed with inflicting the punishment on the blasphemers because they are the keepers of hell. Okay, so here the author, may Allah have mercy on him, he's mentioning that the angels, as I'm sure you know, all have tasks. Allah gives them tasks to do. Some angels, their task is just to worship all the time. They just worship, 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 worship. But some of the other angels have other tasks. There are angels tasked with sending rain to us. There's angels tasked with counting the leaves that fall from the trees. There's angels that do all kinds of different tasks. And yes, some of the angels, their task is to administer the torture of hell. So when the kafirs go to hell on the day of judgment, they will find that there are angels there torturing them. The angels are the ones administering the torture in hell. Just like there's going to be angels on the day of judgment who pull what's referred to as the neck of hell to a place where it's visible to those who are to be judged. So on the day of judgment, before people are sent into hell, a section of hell, referred to as the unuq, the neck of hell, there will be angels who drag it so that the people who are standing on the changed earth and waiting to be judged, They will see this neck of hell, and then they will understand how severe the torture that's waiting for them is. MashaAllah. Okay? So know that angels, yes, they inhabit the sky. They are the occupants of the sky. That's why the phrase men fis sama refers to angels. But know also that some of those angels, their job is to punish people. There are angels whose job it is to punish people in hell, and there are angels whose job it is to punish people on the earth. Like when the people of Prophet Lut, alayhi salam, those people who used to engage in homosexual acts, their land was destroyed. How was it destroyed? The angel Jibreel alayhi salam came there, and he used one feather of the feathers on his 600 wings. He used one feather, and with that one feather lifted up the entire town. And he carried that town way up to the first sky, which is very far away. And then he flipped that town over, and he brought it down to the earth, smashing it down to the ground hard, and destroyed it. And it rained also, stones from the sky. This is an example of a punishment administered by the angels to people on earth. Okay, so these ayahs, when it's asking, do you feel secure? Do you feel safe from the people in the sky? It's not saying, do you feel safe from Allah? It's saying, do you feel safe from the angels? Okay, now, there's nothing wrong if you understand this in like a transitive way as asking, do you feel safe from Allah? Because we know the angels do not act except by the command of Allah. So if the angels will punish you, it's because Allah ordered the angels to punish you. Okay? So if your understanding is that it's saying, do you feel safe from Allah? That's not in and of itself a wrong understanding. But if you understand from this that Allah is in the sky, that is a wrong understanding. Because the phrase men fis sama is actually referring to angels. It's not referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's referring to angels. The angels are the ones in the sky. And the angels are the ones that will administer the punishment if Allah commands them to administer it. And they won't administer it unless Allah commands them. So your fear should be from whom? From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, this does not mean that Allah is in the sky. No, rather this means that the angels are in the sky. And the angels are the ones who, if Allah wills it, will administer a punishment. It says, and they pull a section of hell to the place of judgment so that the blasphemers will be terrified by seeing it. Next paragraph. That narration of Hafiz al-Iraqi, produced in his dictation sessions, its expression is, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahim, yarhamu ahl al-ard. It says here, yarhamkum ahlus sama, but I memorized this as yarhamukum, with a dhamma on the meme of yarhamukum ahlus sama, and it's typed here with a sukoon on it, yarhamkum. So just make a note that what's printed is a sukoon, but what Shaykh Yahya remembers of this hadith is yarhamukum with a dhamma, which means those who are merciful, Ar-Rahim is merciful to them, be merciful to the people of the earth, and the occupants of the sky will be merciful to you. MashaAllah. And with that, we'll stop for today. MashaAllah. We're starting to get close now to the end of this section. I think next week, inshallah, I'm going to add some stuff. Before we continue in this book, I'm going to add some information that's not in the book next week. So, inshallah, we'll talk about that next week, and then we'll come back to the book the week after. It's not a completely different subject. I just plan to mention some things that are not in this book that I feel should be mentioned in this chapter. And I think next week is a good time to mention it before we get into these last few hadith here in this chapter. Are there any questions before we go? Are there any questions? Okay. Well, in that case, I'll see you next week, insha'Allah ta'ala. Let's say La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. بارك الله فيكم. I'll see you next week, inshallah. Same time and place. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.